Welcome to GenFriends. Oh, it's always so much fun to get together. You're lucky you're not in our pre-show. Anyways.
Dan's the problem.
Dan's always the problem. Speaking of which, hi Dan. Welcome to the panel tonight. Dan Earl, our family history guy, who's always making us laugh. So anyway, thanks for being here, Dan.
You bet.
We've got Melissa Barker, the archive lady. Hi, Melissa.
Hello. So good to be here. Can't wait to talk about finding your roots.
For a minute, I think you forgot what we're talking about. That's okay, because I have those moments all the time when I'm introducing you people. I forget who you are. And we also have Shelley Murphy, our family tree girl. Thank you.
You got it.
I got it right. I know. My mind. I start to talk, and it just everything goes blank. So. Anyway. We are excited that Finding Your Roots is back on. And so, as we usually do, we are going to talk about the episodes. And season 6, episode 11, I was confused. I thought it was episode 1 since it's new coming on. But no, my panel here informs me it's episode 11. So we wanted to talk about some of the things that we learned, that the guest stars learned, and the records that they were using. And this time, there was a group of 3 fashion people known in fashion. We had RuPaul, he's fashionista himself.
Definitely.
And we had Diane Von Furstenberg, who everybody knows as a designer, and Narciso Rodriguez, who I don't know that to me he's not as famous. I honestly didn't know who he was, but I sure enjoyed his story. I mean, I'm not really big on buying designer clothes, so I guess all you people out there that buy a lot of designer clothes would know who he is. But they all 3 had just fascinating stories, which we found as we were talking beforehand. There was a lot of stories in this episode versus a lot of record use. But stories are just so important to be passed down. Let's start with RuPaul. Our fashionista extraordinaire, our drag queen, who has got his TV show, and just a very nice guy, I think he is. The interesting thing I thought with him as they were talking to him, because he said he really didn't know much about his family, that they said, your great-grandparents were born at a time when they most likely were born into slavery. And I think it's really interesting when I've seen people told that it takes them a minute and they're like, oh, I don't know that I ever thought about that. And I guess for us as genealogists, we're probably going, wait a minute, how could you not have figured that out, But we need to remember not everybody is looking for their family and they're not thinking about their family in history. Did anybody else ever have that thought as they're presenting to people?
I just always look, and it doesn't matter if I'm looking for, an African American's family or if I'm looking for a white family. When I get and I think it comes up more for me just during the Civil War time because of the schedules that will come up, and that's really, it's not that I expect it all the time. Right. I just automatically look for it from both sides, just because I know the 1850 and 1860 schedules.
Exactly, and that's what we do. So it's interesting to watch people who aren't researching their family and how their reactions are to these stories, because I know probably when all of us got started and we were starting to find stories, we probably had some of those same kind of reactions. I never thought that this would be in my family, They used a lot of archives though in this episode for all 3 of the celebrities. They all went to archives, which I thought Melissa would be very happy about. They were going to archives, and they went to the archives. They were in Louisiana is where they were. One was Soto Parish, and I wanted to talk to you guys about this point that we find a lot of times in these different shows, and we need to remember that we don't see everything. They go hours and hours and hours into research putting these things together, and so as genealogists, sometimes we'll watch and we'll go, wait a second. But, you know, they're trying to tell the story to people. But
Yeah.
I also think it's really important that we make sure that people watching the show may not get the wrong idea as they want to jump into looking for their family history. So the first thing that I kind of wanted to talk about was that whole issue of, because your ancestor's last name is this name, that automatically that must mean that the enslaver's last name was that name. So what are your experiences with that? Shelley.
I find that,
Only about, oh, go ahead, Melissa.
I'm just going to say that, since my expertise is Tennessee research, and that's the clientele that I work with, you can't hardly do Tennessee research without finding yourself doing slave research.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's been my experience that majority of the time it's not the case.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'm not saying it isn't done or it hasn't been done, but for the most part, it's not.
Right. Shelley,
Right,
there's a
Dan.
statistic,
I was gonna let Dan go before I go.
Oh, Dan, were you?
Oh.
I'm sorry, Dan.
Yeah, I was just adding to what Melissa said. When I've done research on my family that lived in Maryland, there were several large families that were enslavers, and looking through their records of sales and transfers and things like that, it's very rare that if the enslaved person had a surname, that surname corresponds directly to the enslaving family. There's often other families around, or just no correlation whatsoever. So when I heard that on the show, I thought, boy, that's a big jump in logic to say that. Of course, this must have been, and not be like, well, it's a remote possibility, but.
Yeah. Right. And you can start, it might be a clue, and start looking in the records, but don't get so stuck on, oh, I have found my ancestors enslaver because they lived near, the plantation was close by, last name is the same, so automatically. There's still a lot of records that we need to look at. Shelley, what did you want to say about that?
Well, a couple things. One, I think it's FamilySearch on the wiki, and they're talking, they quote that only about 15% of the enslaved took on the slaveholder's name. And I'm finding that in the research that I do for my job, but I will say that is the first place I go first to eliminate
it. There you
because
go.
you know what? It's a little bit easier if they did.
Yes.
And, where I might have I might only have a first name.
Right.
But the other point is that people have to pay attention that if they see an enslaved person with a surname, and I'm going to say prior to 1870, because of other records,
right,
that they need to pay attention to that surname because it might connect from another family member, like in a grandmother or mother
or
parent. And because I found a trail where they took on, like, the mother and the child got split, and they took the mother's slaveholder's surname,
right,
as a kid. So it rarely happens, but my gosh, it would make research
wouldn't
so
it?
much easier.
Wouldn't it?
But then
one thing we
had
learned
the
is
opportunity to take it any name they wanted,
right?
So regardless of what happened prior to the Civil War ending,
exactly.
They had an opportunity to take whatever name they wanted.
So I guess what we're saying is, sometimes these shows make things look so simple, and if you're not, if you're not someone who's used to doing research, you might look at that and think, oh, this is what I have to do. Number one, I've got to find someone in the area who had slaves with the same name, and then I've got to pull up that notorious slave schedule and see if that person had someone the same age as my ancestor, and bingo, I've found it. And it's not quite.
I did a couple hours, and that was just to eliminate that they had the same name, and it was about 2 hours it took me today on one. So
you need so many more records than that. So Melissa, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say, you know, and I find this in all aspects of genealogy, not just African American research, but and especially my own research. When you're researching a particular ancestor or a family line, you know, there are no cookie cutter answers. You know, just because when you research this ancestor or this line and you found information this way or this information, when you go to another line, it most likely you're not going to find it the same way. It's not going to be the same, you know, presented to you the same. So that's why it's important for us genealogists for us to learn.
Exactly.
And I'm continually learning. I've been doing this for 30 years.
I'm
continually learning
Yes.
new ways of research, new avenues of research where there are records found that I didn't know where they were. And so, you know, it's always important for us to not try to use a cookie cutter in all of our research projects.
Absolutely. Well, you know, and then on his, this was on his paternal side, and then they started talking, or was it, no, and then they went to his maternal side, and we had the same kind of thing going on with some records, and this time they found some papers in an archive. So, you know, they went to the archives again. The archives were open at that point, you know, and they found manumission papers. And what they found was a document. That's a document that has the enslaver giving freedom to some of his enslaved people. And he was freeing 2 children. They mentioned the mother in the document. The mother wasn't freed, but the children were. And so there seemed to be an assumption, but again, we don't know what other records they may have found that we just didn't, you know, we weren't privy to, but there seemed to be an assumption of, oh, that must have meant that the enslaver was the father of these children. And so he must have done it out of love. Any thoughts on that? He must not have loved the mom. Didn't free her. Yes, well, Dan.
It was very interesting. So Dr. Gates asked RuPaul, what does this mean to you? And then RuPaul's the one that came out with it. It wasn't the research that was coming out and said that, it was just they sort of
emotional part of it.
Yeah, they left the door open, and then RuPaul walked through it.
Right.
So to me, it was a really good reminder as a professional to not do that. To let the evidence do the talking and not me set up and frame this story.
Exactly.
And is it possible?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there must have been some reason, you know.
But we
just
can't
don't know.
assume that we know a reason from 150 years ago or 200 years ago. We can't make those assumptions. There could have been a number of other reasons why those 2 were manumitted and not their mother. And so, but I mean, it does make for great television, right?
Sure it does.
It would have been like, well, you know, probably not. Oh, well, yeah.
We don't know.
We don't know. You know,
and
the show would be a lot shorter. You know?
Exactly. And we're not at any means trying to diss the show. We're just you know, want people to remember that, you know, unless the record tells you that, you can't just assume and write a story around a record. The record has to lead the story.
And the record could be wrong too.
And the record could be wrong.
And we've come across that as well, or in research, but I think you can always start a story off with, well, I've got 2 versions.
There you go.
You know what I'm saying? Because you might be dealing with oral history.
Sure.
And then a record.
Yeah.
And then you're going to question who sent down, or as a researcher, I'm going to question that oral history to see if it's going to support the document. But it doesn't always work that way either.
This is true. Now, I know, Shelley, you had mentioned, I'm sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
I was just going to say that, you know, Dan's talking about RuPaul and how he came out with that, and it was emotional for him. And, you know, as genealogists, I mean, if you're not emotional about your ancestors and your research, I mean, I'll venture to say you're maybe not doing it right, but we all get emotional, whether that's a happy emotion or a sad emotion or whatever.
Frustrated.
But we can't let our emotions guide our research.
Exactly.
Because we'll believe things and we'll see things, and maybe in records, or we'll see things in oral histories that are not the full truth or not at all true or whatever, just because we have the emotions attached to it.
And that creates those brick walls a lot of times that we talk about a lot, because we're making assumptions. We're thinking records say something that we want them to say.
Yes.
Because it sounds more romantic. Yeah, it sounds more
For the
romantic.
family.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
And I don't think there's romantic in this when we're trying to even verify if the records are correct, because it seems like everything we do, we need to have that evidence to back it up.
Absolutely.
And that's that little rule of 3 that I follow and teach from James Dent Walker. He just said, if you're going to say anything, then provide me 3 pieces of evidence to support that. You know, and I think Tom Jones says, get 2 more pieces. That. But you want something.
Or as many as you can find.
As many as you can find, but at least come up with 2 or 3 things that support whatever route we're going. So
absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. So good story. He learned a lot about his family using those archival records, which I think a lot of people, and we've talked about this before, Melissa, I think a lot of people get intimidated about going into an archives. You know, they want to get online and they want to find those birth, death, marriages, what military records, whatever they can find online, but they're intimidated about actually walking into an archives. But oh my gosh, the things that you can find, you know, those old records you can touch and the smell, and it's a beautiful experience.
That's where the emotion comes in too.
Exactly.
But, you know, you're right. And I was a genealogist for many, many years before I became an archivist. And once I became an archivist, it's strange when you get on the other side. I started paying attention to genealogists. Yeah, I know. I did. And so I see these genealogists come in and, you know, and I can see the intimidation and their trepidation. And I'm thinking, what is wrong with you? This is an archive, man. You know,
this is a happy place. Happy place.
But so that's kind of got me going, you know, with the archive lady and my teaching and lecturing and things like that. And so what I try to tell people is, you know, we're talking about statistics earlier. Statistics tell us that really there's only about 5% of the world's genealogical records, and I honestly think it's less than that, that are online. The remaining 95% are sitting in boxes on shelves waiting for us to find them. And, you know, even before our current predicament that we have in this year, people still did not go to archives that much. They either they stayed online. Well, okay, we're in a predicament now. I encourage you, research online, but also reach out by email, by telephone. If an archives has a presence on Facebook or Twitter or Flickr or any of those social media, reach out to them that way. Because if they're closed, they're closed. I get that. But there are still many archivists who are working from home or they're working in their facilities, but they're not open to the public.
Right.
I have just last week, I talked to several archivists who talked about they can't keep up with the email and the phone call requests. They're filling them as fast as they can, which tells me they're working.
They're working. That's great.
I can give you a personal example. I live in Tennessee. My ancestors are from West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, up in that area. I have not traveled to those areas. For the past 30 years, I've been able to do my research and gather a tremendous amount of documentation on my ancestors. Now, there are still some things I'm going to have to go there and see because they just don't send them to you. But I have found some tremendous amount of records just sitting at home, writing those letters, that telephone and that email. So I encourage people to do that.
Absolutely. There's good stuff that you're not going to find anywhere else in an archive. Let's move on to Diane Von Furstenberg. I really liked her story.
Her story was impactful.
It was very impactful. Her mom, and the reason why I liked this is her mom was captured in Belgium. She was working for the Belgium resistance and she was captured, and she was afraid to tell them, yes, I'm working for the resistance. So she said, I'm Jewish. I mean, she said, I'm Jewish, which sent her to Auschwitz. I mean, you know, it's just, that's what happened. She was able to live through it. But my point is sometimes you'll find these stories and it was Dr. Gates that had to tell them, did you know that your mother, that your grandmother, she spoke about this. She talked about us. She let her child know, you know, that these were my experiences. So those family stories were impactful. And that's what I liked about her story, that it wasn't a hidden story. And there was a quote, if I can find it, and she said her mom said, "You never know when the worst thing that happened to you can be the best." And she was referring to when she was put on the train. You know, they didn't know where they were going. They just knew they were being put on the train. And there was an older woman, and she clung to this older woman because she had nobody. She was, you know, they took her. She was 21 years old.
21.
She was all by herself. She bonded with this older woman. They get off the train and they start, you know, sending them different directions. So she
left or right, wasn't it?
Right, left or right. And so she grabbed onto this older woman and tried to go with her. And the guard told her no and sent her the other direction. And that act of the guard actually saved her life.
I think so.
Because the older woman went with the group that were gassed. They were killed. And so that saved her life. And so Diane Von Furstenberg was saying, because of that decision, saving my mother's life, I'm here. And so that's why her mom would always say that. You never know when the worst thing that's happened to you becomes the best thing. You don't know until time goes on. But she was able to share that. So they were able to take this really horrific thing that happened in their family and learn from it, you know, share that story and have a teaching moment, which you don't find a lot. A lot of it, you know, we've watched these shows and it seems like a lot of them, they couldn't talk about it, you know. And so I really liked it because of that story and that passing down of a family story, and that she was, you know, when she was telling the story, it was very matter of fact. This is what happened. You know, this is what I take from it. I'm here. You know, look at the things that I've been able to do and the people that I've been able to help. But then I thought again about Melissa, because they showed a ledger book. And Melissa has talked several times about ledger books, because as they were gathering those stories, they were looking in archives and they were able to find a ledger book from the archives. And that ledger book was talking about how her ancestors were in a town in Greece, and that town caught on fire.
Correct.
And this ledger book had the list of names of these people that were there, and they would have not known this had they not found this ledger book. And this ledger book is not digitized and it's not online. They had to actually look and find things in the archives. So I was like, Melissa, look at that. There's a ledger book.
That's right.
But you know what was really interesting, and you're talking about RuPaul and Diane's, you know, was the women. And I was amazed because these stories were coming from women, survivor women.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I thought that was amazing. And even for a next generation of girls, of daughters.
To learn from that. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, to hear what their great grandma did and things like that. I mean, to me, it's almost emotional also to think that they survived, because you know, when you hear these stories, you know, like the left or the right, you know, where you go, and exactly. Then you think back and you realize, oh my gosh, you know,
absolutely,
that one moment saved
that one moment.
I
Dan,
love those.
Yes, absolutely, Dan. Sorry,
yeah, that to me kind of stood out as sort of a theme for the episode of like all these people come from a long line of tough people that made tough decisions and have grown and sort of done this own thing. And there's a growing body of evidence in the psychology community for something called intergenerational identity.
Yes.
Where when you can see yourself as a part of a continuum of ancestors going in one direction and either actual or potential descendants going past you, it puts your life in context. You know, I was listening to a younger lady talk yesterday at church, and she was talking about how she was reading about one of her ancestors that had to basically live her life as a single woman because her husband was off you know, working in the mines and left, you know, and was sending the money to support, but he was gone.
Right.
And she's like, you know, if my grandma can do that, I think I can do my homework. You know,
I love that.
And so it doesn't always have to be these
we
very
gain
emotional,
strength.
spectacular
Yeah.
examples
Exactly,
that
yeah.
we see in the episode. It can be very small things that we can learn
Mhm.
about an ancestor that we can pass on to
Exactly.
our kids or grandchildren or
Exactly.
nieces or nephews to give them that sense of intergenerational self,
Sure.
you know?
Sure.
Yeah. You know, I find that I gain strength from
Mhm.
my ancestors
Mhm.
and their stories. And guess that's why it keeps me going too, is that I keep wanting to dig up more stories, more
Mhm.
records, and know
Mhm.
more about them, not just
Sure.
their birth and death and marriage dates. I want to know about them.
Yeah.
And so, and my ancestors, like anybody else's ancestors, they went through things,
Mhm.
you know, and
Yeah.
whenever I go through things, you know, I kind of tap into that. I kind
Yeah.
of think to myself, you know, if my grandparents can go
To
through
do
this,
that.
then I can go through this, you know.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think it gives you a little bit, it kind of helps a
mhm.
little bit.
Oh, I agree. And I think I've told this story on GenFriends before, as we're talking about our ancestors and their roles in our lives and the strength they give us. Um, I did the same thing when my son passed away almost 5 years ago. I looked back to all of those ancestors that I had been researching all those years and all those children that they'd had that had passed away, and how did they get through this? How were they strong enough to move on? And they did. You know, they made it through. They were able to somehow, and I thought, well, if they could do it for generations, then I can do it. And so we do. We can look to their stories and learn. It wasn't just her. It wasn't just her mother that had a horrible story that happened. Her father's mother, so her maternal paternal grandmother,
Grandmother.
had a horrible story too. Her father, luckily, got out to go to school. So he went to Belgium, but he was from Russia, but he got out and went to school, and he never got to go back because the war started. And it turns out that his mom was picked up and captured by the Nazis, and she was killed. They're not quite sure how, but they know that this group of people was either, some of them were put in a building and burned. Some of those same groups of people, they were just shot to death, and some of them died. They froze waiting for whatever their destiny was going to be with the Nazis. And so, you know, so she had this horrific tale on both sides, both her maternal and her paternal side. So, you know, for her to even be able to say, hey, you know what, I'm here.
Yeah.
And I forged on and I made a good life, to me is just, it's a wonderful use of family story to build, instead of that family story to tear apart or to make you so that, well, you know, this happened to our people, so therefore I'm all sad and depressed. You know what I'm trying to say. You can either use a
Yeah.
family story to build, or the family story can just be something to kind of put you in a box, you know.
Yeah.
So
That's why I think some genealogists do a disservice by just wanting to know, you know, the basic dates and move
yes,
on.
yes,
Because, you know, there is so much more there, good, bad, and ugly,
yeah, oh yeah,
that,
Yeah.
you know, that paints the full picture of your
Mhm.
ancestry, of your
Sure.
ancestors, but it's something you can tap into
Oh,
to gain the
absolutely.
strength and, you know, and just, I don't know, just appreciation for
Yeah.
what has gone behind you, so that you can be
Exactly.
here today.
Right.
You know, it's interesting you guys are talking about that, because I know I did an interview thing for this thing called Daughters Dialogue, or yeah, Daughters Dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And after I finished it, I thought about it and I thought, my daughter's going to hear this. And which it was good,
Yeah, that
but
is
there
great.
might have been some things that she didn't know, and I thought after that. And it was
Surprise!
an interview about women of color in the
Uh,
Daughters of the American Revolution,
oh,
but
that's
it was
wonderful
about
though.
you,
Yeah.
the woman of color daughter.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I thought, okay, she's now going to have a little more, which I don't know if I shared with her or not, just not
Yeah.
realizing.
Yeah.
But again, when you're talking about that strength and things like
Mhm.
that, and
Mhm.
then I saw her posting on Facebook, and she referenced about me being
Oh,
strong, surviving, you know, this, that, and the
oh, that's
other.
wonderful.
And so then I
Yeah.
said, okay, I'm okay.
Yeah, you did a good thing. We
Yeah, I
need
thought it
to,
was a good thing. And it's going to be in the
right.
Harvard archives and stuff like that. It's a project that
Yeah, so
Bill is
future
doing.
generations. That's
Yes.
wonderful. We do need to share those stories.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Narciso Rodriguez,
Yes.
another designer. I liked his story because it was some different things that I hadn't heard about before. You know, he's Cuban descent, and we've had some things about Cuba, but this one a little further, and it went to the Canary Islands, which I thought that's really cool. I don't remember anybody on the show before being
I
from
don't
the
either.
Canary Islands, but some of the things that they used for him, where they were able to find those birth certificates and those types of things, but they used a lot of maps and photos to help him to be able to see, you know, what they were talking about in reference to where his family lived. And they lived in caves. Was that
Yeah.
so cool, guys? That they built caves, homes
Yeah.
to live in the mountains. And what I thought was even funnier is that today those things are still there and they're Airbnbs.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you want to go to
Yeah.
Canary Islands, you can go stay in the cave in an Airbnb. Is that funny? And of
Yes.
course, he had absolutely no clue. He had
No
never heard
awareness
this.
whatsoever.
No, and I
No.
love that. I love that when you can tell somebody something about their heritage, their
And
family
it's
history,
new.
that it's completely new. It's, you know, they had no inkling about this, and so you could
Yeah.
see that. You could see that in his face, you know, and that was his paternal side. That and it turned out that went back far enough that they it was in the 1400s. They had a petition where his 14th great grandfather
14th, I think it
14th
was.
great, can you imagine that, going back to 14th great grandfather and
Yeah.
actually having the record for it, and showed that he was a Spanish conquistador. So
Yeah.
he,
And he looked up.
no, Spanish
What?
conquistador? What the heck? Yeah. So, and then on top of that, the Spanish conquistador married an indigenous woman. So not only is he descended from the Spanish, but from the indigenous people that lived there. So how cool is that? So, you know, that was brand new. That was something I hadn't heard about.
I
And
thought that was kind of a first on the show too,
yeah.
going off that route. I know you know, and might be confusing a little bit with finding your roots, but I don't remember any of the Cuban. I think I remember Dominican Republic,
Maybe,
but I
yeah, I
don't
think so.
remember Cuba that much. But
Yeah.
again, we're in the 6th season, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. Anybody else? Anything that struck you from the Canary Islands and what they use? I really did like the
The
use of the
maps.
maps and the photos, though, because getting those photos really helps you. I mean, when somebody tells you your ancestor lived in a cave in the side of the mountains, all 4 of us probably have a different thing that popped into our head about what that cave may have looked like, right? Ah! But to see the photos, it
Yeah.
just it made sense. It made sense
Yeah.
because of the terrain. It made
Yes.
sense that that's where they lived. So those
But
kind
you
of
know,
things.
we're also learning about these other countries that
Exactly. We would have
you
never
know,
known.
had information on. And I'm
Yeah.
trying to get, that's going to be a nephew, and he's out of the DR, the Dominican Republic.
Ah.
And I started went to the FamilySearch Wiki and said, okay, what's in there? How do I get these records? Because immediately I
Yeah.
thought church records
Sure.
and
Oh, yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
but
yeah.
the naming patterns
All those
blew
kind of
me
things we need
away.
to,
And
all
I
that stuff
had to
we need to
pull
learn
away.
about.
Yeah, I
And
had to
Shelley,
pull
you bring
away.
up a really good point, because as we're watching these shows and people might think, you know what? I have people from the Canary Islands, or I have people from whatever it may be.
Right.
The FamilySearch Wiki is the place to go. It's free. You get on, you type in what you're looking for, and it will show you what records, what's available, what archives may be available, what,
It's
you know,
world.
where to go and where to search. So yeah, that's a really good point for people to get to the wiki. On his mother's side, however, he discovered that he was a descendant of slaves in
Right.
Cuba. And what I know I'd heard this statistic before, but it's been a while. They had over 1 million slaves in tiny little Cuba.
Yeah.
You know, they had more slaves than the United States. And I know that I'd heard that before, but it's been a while. So that really shocked me, that that number again, that they had, you know, that many people enslaved there. And they found in the archives again, like all three, they went to the archives, right? They found a baptism record, and that baptism record is what led them to understand that he was a descendant of the slave woman, because it had on there that the mother was a slave. So that's how that information came out, was by finding that baptism record. Also, he found out that his third great grandfather had 200 acre farm, and so naturally that's why he owned the slaves.
Records.
Exactly, because he had to take care of that acreage. So
and pay taxes. I mean, as far as record sets,
right? Who knows what else they may have been able to find? Yeah, what would be great is if they would list for each guest the types of records that they found. Wouldn't that be so cool? Maybe we can send in a request.
Well, they're in the book, the Book of Life. You know.
Well, I know the guest gets it, but I would like to know
at the end of the show.
I wish they would send out with the credits. They would have a list under each person's name. But Melissa, you made a list.
I did. A list.
Yeah. What was your list?
At the end of each show, and in times past, they haven't done this whenever they've put the show online. Because I tried to do it, but they run in the credits the list of where they found the archival materials. It says archival materials courtesy of.
Right.
And in this episode, there was a total of 27 references. However, only 16 of them were actual genealogical archives. And so, you know, going back to
16 out of the 27.
16 of the 27.
And clarify what you mean, what your link is. Because in my mind, everything archival would be genealogical.
This is true. So, they actually accessed a lot of what are considered archives, are like photo archives, photo sharing archives, to get some of the stuff, because they're celebrities, getting a lot of the celebrity photos. Like the AP, Associated Press archive.
Yes.
And there's an archive called Alamy, ALAMY, which is a celebrity photo archive thing.
I gotcha. I guess if your ancestor was a celebrity, then to you that would be a genealogical source.
I mean, and then there's the Getty images and Everett collection. Those are also that kind of thing.
Right.
But the archives that were really great, I just wanted to share about them, is the Belgian State Archives for RuPaul.
Right.
The Civil Registry at Arrakis. If you remember the name Arrakis, I can't remember which one it was. It was that. I'm talking about the maps, the Dave Rumsey map collection. How many of us have used that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And then RuPaul, DeSoto County Court Clerk.
Right.
They did that.
Gotta go local.
And I thought this was pretty interesting. Diane Von Furstenberg, she is listed as sharing stuff from her own archive. So they have it listed as Diane Von Furstenberg Archives.
Oh, wow.
So see, they have some of the stuff that they have, which I'm guessing is probably pictures and things that they shared, were from her own archive.
Wow.
Records. So that was pretty cool.
Wow, that is cool.
Some of the stuff I can't pronounce. El Museo, this is from the Canary Islands.
That would probably be why.
The Imperial War Museum, the John Carter Brown Library at Brown University, which I thought was
wow. Yeah.
The Concern Dasein Fonds Kumar. Now, Fonds, if I did not look this up, but the word Fonds, Fonds, in Canada and Europe, is a word that they use for manuscript collection. So when you're doing Europe or Canadian research, you're not probably going to find the term manuscript. You're going to find the word Fonds.
I gotcha.
Can you spell that?
E.
I know you're checking.
Not that Fonds. Wrong Fonds. Wrong Fonds.
That Fonds? No, spell that word.
Fonds.
Okay.
Yeah. Of course, the Library of Congress.
Oh, yeah.
St. Martin's Parish Archives, which was for RuPaul.
Right.
University of Cumbria, Coimbra.
Mhm.
The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, which is a fantastic
Yes.
archive, that would be for
Yes.
Diane.
Right.
The Yad Vashem Photo Archive in Jerusalem.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that's a good one. And then the Yeno Institute for Jewish Research.
Hmm.
And then the last one, which is pretty near and dear to my heart, it was the Tennessee State Library and Archives. And I found it
Oh.
interesting listed
Oh.
because I did not remember anyone
Anything
talking
from
about.
Tennessee.
Yeah, but
But this-
doesn't archives have other
I
stuff?
was just going to say that brings up another research
Yes.
trick or advice I give to genealogists is, records are not where they're supposed to be many times. There are archives like the Tennessee State Library and Archives, and even my little archives where I work, we have records that really shouldn't be there,
Yeah.
but they were donated, they were going to be
Mhm.
thrown away, they were going to
Yeah.
be whatever, and we took them in.
Right. Right.
This is especially true for your university and college archives because a lot of times alumni will donate their papers to their
Mhm.
college alum.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they may not even have been from there. They just went to
Right.
college there.
Exactly. Exactly.
Excellent point. I
Yeah.
looked for Battle Muse, Muse, and he was like some affiliation with George Washington.
Uh-huh.
And we're up in Jefferson County, now West Virginia. And of course, George's brothers, they're surveying and they own land. There's a couple plantations still there in the Washington family. And some affiliation Mr. Muse had with George. And all of his papers are at Duke University.
Ah.
So I'm just, and this
Right.
is what now West Virginia. But the time he was alive, it was Virginia. But everything was there. That's where I got his will, was at Duke
Wow.
University.
Isn't that
This is up in
interesting?
Jefferson County. Yeah.
Yep.
So it was very interesting and a point well taken, Melissa.
So Melissa, I'm thinking that that's a good learning exercise too, is to watch those credits on any of these genealogy shows. Watch the credits. Where did they
yes.
research? Because they don't have time to show you everything and everywhere they went. But if you look at that list, it might, some little light bulbs might go off in your mind. Oh, I haven't thought about looking in this type of place or this type of place. So
Right.
it'd be a very good, like I said, learning exercise to kind of come up with some ideas for where you can look for your own ancestors.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering if the online show, where you go to PBS and you go to
That's how I
Find
watched
Your
it.
Roots,
Yeah.
and you go there. I wondered if the list of credits are there also. Because
They
you
were on the. They were at the end
That's
of
where,
the show.
yeah.
That's where I got this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I
Okay,
watched
that's
it
cool.
online because I don't have the PBS. But
Okay.
Very
yeah,
cool.
that's right. Because I was worried because in past seasons I've watched it online and the credits were not at the
there.
end.
That's
But
a
they're
really
there.
good tip, Melissa. That's a really, really good tip,
Yeah.
because I do think that, people will watch the show. I mean, even, those of us that have been doing genealogy for years, sometimes I know that they'll show a record from someplace and I'll be like, where on earth would they have gotten something like that? And so that's how you find that out. So from newbies to those of us that have been doing it for decades, that's a great resource of just ideas of where to look for records. So is there anything else anybody wanted to bring out about the show? It's great to have it back. It's great to, because you watch and then you get all excited about, okay, I'm going to work on my stuff now, It gets people in the door. It gets people excited about doing their genealogy, about capturing their family stories. And so that's why these shows are so important. And so we'll cover these episodes that are coming up and try to pull out the records and the sources and the things that they used, and hopefully help our viewers as they watch to understand how they can use these same type of records to help them climb their family trees. So with that, I guess we'll say goodbye and we'll see you next time on GenFriends. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.